Hi, everybody, and I hope you to be healthy and doing well and have a very, very good time uh, in your homes. Today, in this file, that is file number 8, I'm going to introduce you another endocrine gland in the body, and this is the adrenal gland. In some aspect, I can say that adrenal gland is one of the most important uh, endocrine gland in the body, and I have a reason for that. Because when we remove in the experimental animals, when we remove the adrenal gland from the body, uh, in some days, in very very limited days, 2 or 3 days, these animals will die unless we compensate for the hormones that are being that are being deprived or it is lacking, particularly two hormones, cortisol and aldosterone. And this is one reason to assume that adrenal gland is one of the most important tissues. I cannot say that one tissue is not important, but adrenal gland is among the best and uh, most important ones. When you have a look at the adrenal gland, you can see that it is placed in the upper pole of the kidneys, right and left kidney. And for this reason, sometimes it is referred as a suprarenal gland. The adrenal gland receive high amount of blood flow through superior suprarenal artery, middle suprarenal artery, and inferior suprarenal artery, as you can see in this figure. And the venous blood will be drained into the left and right suprarenal vein. And the hormones, therefore, will be distributed around the body. If I cut the adrenal gland and make a section, you can see that adrenal gland itself is not homogeneous. At the center, we have medulla, and this medulla is completely different from the area that covered this, and this part is named as cortex. The cortex itself is composed of three different cell layers: zona reticularis, zona fasciculata, and zona glomerulosa. And as you can see, we have not a sharp border between these layers. There is a gradual change in the population of cells, and the medulla, reticularis, and fasciculata and glomerulosa all are known as adrenal gland. But when we are talking about adrenal cortex, then the medulla is excluded. Therefore, pay attention. Adrenal cortex means the cortical area, but adrenal medulla involve also the medulla. This is another section in the another view, and as you can see, the medulla is like at the center, and the different layers of cortex is covering this medulla layer. And as you can see, about 90%, 80 to 90% of the volume of whole adrenal gland is the cortex, and just 20% is the medulla. Regarding the hormones that are released from these two parts, all the hormones that are released from cortical area are steroid hormones. And for this reason, the cells in the cortex are named as steroidogenic cells. And the hormones that are released by these three layers are sometimes named as corticosteroid. Cortico refer to the cortex, steroid refer to the chemical nature of the hormones. But these hormones are not the same. Zona reticularis mainly release the adrenal androgens, particularly dehydroepiandrosterone, dehydroepiandrosterone sulfate. These are the family of testosterone, but there are but weaker ones. The zona fasciculata release the very important hormone of cortisol, and finally we have zona glomerulosa that release aldosterone. But medulla is completely different because medulla do not release any steroid hormone. It releases catecholamines, and the main catecholamine that is released from this area is epinephrine, and with lesser extent norepinephrine. Therefore, these cells are named as chromaffin cells. They are able to convert tyrosine amino acid into norepinephrine and then epinephrine. This is a general introduction about adrenal cortex, and now let me firstly review the hormone that is released from the adrenal medulla and its function very briefly, and then continue with the adrenal cortex. When we are talking about adrenal medulla, firstly you should pay attention that adrenal medulla is somehow a part of the sympathetic nervous system and autonomic nervous system, because it receives perisynaptic fiber of the sympathetic nervous system, and their stimulation is controlled by the sympathetic nervous system. I can say that medulla is like an exiled part of the nervous system that is being placed in the suprarenal gland. Because it has no neuronal structure, it is not known as neurons. But their product that is the epinephrine and norepinephrine is similar to the product of the sympathetic nervous system. The process of the synthesis of these hormones is quite and pretty like the cell that we have in the sympathetic neurons in the sympathetic nervous system, except one difference that I will tell you. Firstly, these cells should uptake tyrosine from the blood. This amino acid will be ready every time to be converted into the mediators in the metabolism of the epinephrine and norepinephrine. There is one enzyme named as tyrosine hydroxylase. This enzyme is available in the cytoplasm when it is stimulated. But in the situation that adrenal medulla is not stimulated, tyrosine hydroxylase is not expressed well. Therefore, conversion of tyrosine into X-DOPA is a rate-limiting step. This tyrosine hydroxylase is mainly stimulated by sympathetic activation. I mean, every time that sympathetic nervous system is stimulated in the brain, one stimulation will reach also adrenal gland, the medulla, and the tyrosine hydroxylase enzyme will be expressed. Now, under the function of tyrosine hydroxylase in the cytoplasm, X-DOPA will form, and then this X-DOPA will be converted into dopamine. You see that there is another enzyme, amino acid decarboxylase. This enzyme is not rate limiting. This is not regulated. This is available. And then dopamine, you know that dopamine is a neurotransmitter, very important and very famous neurotransmitter in the brain. In the brain, those cells that release dopamine will stop in this level, and dopamine will be the final product of them. But in the adrenal medulla, there is another enzyme that this enzyme is also under the control of sympathetic nervous system, and this is named as dopamine hydroxylase. Dopamine hydroxylase is stimulated by sympathetic nervous system, and in the granules that we have in the medullary cells, dopamine will be converted into norepinephrine. This step is also available and seen in the neurons that in the brain that release norepinephrine. In fact, the difference that we have between noradrenergic neurons and dopaminergic neurons is that in the dopaminergic neurons, the final product will be dopamine, but in the noradrenergic neurons, dopamine beta hydroxylase is also expressed. Therefore, dopamine will be converted into norepinephrine. And in the sympathetic nervous system, norepinephrine will be the final product. Or I can say that mainly the final product. But what about the adrenal medulla? Adrenal medulla, in the adrenal medulla, under the stimulation and availability of high concentration of cortisol, another enzyme is also expressed in the cytoplasm named as phenylethanolamine L-methyltransferase. And the name of this enzyme is not very important because I do not want to make you nervous. But this enzyme is a very important enzyme. And it is stimulated by the presence of high cortisol stimulation. I will talk about this. Therefore, in the medulla, we have cortisol available, and because cortisol is available, therefore the enzyme phenylethanolamine N-methyltransferase will be expressed. Therefore, norepinephrine will be converted into epinephrine. What about the sympathetic nervous system? This enzyme is less expressed. Therefore, in the sympathetic nervous system, the response, the product will be epinephrine, but in the medulla, the product will be epinephrine. And then epinephrine will be uptaken into the granules and ready to be released. Every time that the release comes from the sympathetic nervous system, these granules will be released and epinephrine will be released into the blood. Have a look at the structure of the adrenal cortex and medulla. I told you that presence of high cortisol is a effector and is a factor that stimulates this enzyme and is responsible for higher concentration of epinephrine we have in the medulla. When you look at the structure, you can see that the zona fasciculata cells produce the cortisol, and this cortisol will flow and diffuse into the medullary area. Therefore, the medullary area are receiving high concentration of epinephrine, high concentration of cortisol, and therefore they are able to convert norepinephrine into epinephrine. But this high level of cortisol is not available for sympathetic nervous system, and for this reason, sympathetic nervous system will release more norepinephrine or noradrenaline. This physiological mechanism is somehow important to be understood. What are the stimulators of the sympathetic nervous system and then the medulla? As you can see, all the factors that stimulate the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, are also stimulating the, at the same time, parallel, stimulate the adrenal medulla. It's not different. For example, anxiety, pain, trauma, hypovolemia, low blood pressure, hypoglycemia, hypothermia. These factors will converge into the hypothalamus medulla pons and stimulate the sympathetic branch and sympathetic nuclei. And these nuclei will send periganglionic nerves into the sympathetic ganglia, and from sympathetic ganglia the postganglionic neuron will originate, and the product will be norepinephrine in the sympathetic nervous system. But at the same time, you can see that periganglionic neurons will reach medulla and stimulate the medullary cells by stimulating the acetylcholine receptors. It is quite similar to the sympathetic ganglia, and in the medulla, a stimulation of this sympathetic nervous system will stimulate the release expression of tyrosine hydroxylase and beta and dopamine decarboxylase, and therefore a stimulation of epinephrine production. I can say that when sympathetic nervous system is stimulated, not only it releases norepinephrine and control the blood pressure, blood glucose, and several other functions very, very fastly, but with a delay, they stimulate the release of another family members named epinephrine, and this epinephrine has the chance to maintain and hold the blood pressure and maintain the blood pressure for a longer period of time. And by these figure, you can understand that how brain control the medullary secretion, particularly in the situation that blood pressure or blood volume and blood temperature is changing. When these epinephrine and norepinephrine, either of them, are released into the blood, they are hormones, and they are named as catecholamines. Up to now, we know two set of receptors for the catecholamines. One alpha receptor and one another family is beta receptor. Now we know that at least there are several subtype of alpha and several subtype of beta receptor. But now we say alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, 2, and 3. And these receptor, every one of these, receptors are using different type of primary mechanism. For example, alpha 1 stimulate IP3, increase calcium, but alpha 2 decrease the cyclic AMP. At the same time, beta 1 and beta 2 increase cyclic AMP. And therefore, if we see that there are sometimes contradicting effect from the same hormone, it refers to the enzyme. It refers to the receptor. For example, in one tissue, epinephrine will stimulate vascular contraction. And in another tissue, the same epinephrine will stimulate vasodilation. You may say, how it is possible? Because in the skeletal muscle, for example, we have beta receptors, but in the vascular muscle, we have alpha receptors. And these generate two types of responses. The beta receptor are mainly known to be a stimulant and have more affinity for epinephrine than norepinephrine. And alpha receptors have more affinity for norepinephrine. And as you can see, they have several metabolic functions, such as increasing glycogenolysis, increasing gluconeogenesis, increasing lipolysis. In the state of trauma, in the state of stress, we should provide more and more glucose resource available. And for this reason, production of new glucose will be promoted. Release of new glucose will be promoted. Calorigenesis will be increased. Glucose utilization at the same time will decrease. We want to increase the glucose concentration. Glucagon secretion at the same time will increase. Insulin also will increase. Cardiac contractility will increase. Heart rate will increase. These all try to maintain the blood glucose high, on the other hand, maintain the function of the cardiovascular system high, and provide enough and ensure there are enough energy source available. On the other hand, we have alpha receptor that I told you. They also stimulate the gluconeogenesis, glucogenolysis. They are the same as the epinephrine and beta receptor. But when it comes to the insulin secretion, they are completely different. Alpha receptor inhibit insulin secretion and beta receptor is stimulated. And also it increases cardiac contractility, heart output will increase, and all of them try to maintain the blood pressure high. This figure show that the cooperation that we have beta and alpha receptor in different area of the body not only increase the heart rate, increase oxygenation in the blood, but also at the same time increase blood flow to the muscles. On the other hand, it stimulates bronchial to facilitate the exchange of oxygen. On the other hand, it stimulates the GI system to lower the energy source. On the other hand, it stimulates the blood glucose. In the skeletal muscle, decrease blood usage, release of glucose from the skeletal muscle or adipose tissue. And all of them, in one sentence, I can say that all of them are working to in emergency situation. For example, I fell in one area and my leg is broken. In that situation, I should provide more and more glucose for my body. Oxygenation should be as facilitated. In the state, not just all the stressful situation, in the state of exercise, for example. Again, the same is true. Glucose concentration should be high. Cardiovascular system should be upgraded. Their activity, oxygenation will increase, and therefore it provides enough chance for me to do exercise. These were action of the catecholamine that I told you, and all will help muscle to work better and for a longer period of time. The catecholamine, like other hormones in the body, have some enzyme in the body in different type in different place in the cell that are able to convert epinephrine into its inactive epinephrine or non-epinephrine into its inactive forms or metabolize them. For example, cocktail O-methyltransferase that convert epinephrine to metanephrine or norepinephrine to normethanephrine, or monoamino oxidase that convert the norepinephrine and epinephrine into dehydroxymandelic acid. This will inactivate the hormone. This enzyme will inactivate the hormone and then will be removed from the body. And these are the metabolites, norepinephrine, VMA, norepinephrine, are the metabolites that will be excreted into the urine. And by this enzymes, the function of these catecholamine will be terminated until the next time that another load of this hormone will be released. And as you remember, because all the function of these hormones and this system is quite similar to the sympathetic nervous system, and mainly is responsible for maintaining the metabolism and also the cardiovascular function and the vascular pressure, blood pressure. Therefore, I will finish this part here and then discuss about the cortical hormones that are more important hormones, and you should know them very well. About the cortical hormones, cortisol, aldosterone, and dihydroepiandrosterone in the next file, inshallah.